Hello, my name is Franka Ludwig. I'm a childcare worker, poet, and autism advocate, and you can find all my articles on autism at autismappreciation.com. This is the first article that I wrote on autism and group dynamics. It's called Autism versus Group Dynamics and Authority. Since I was a child, I have been amazed at how easily people are manipulated and follow a crowd, a leader, or a trend. When I realized I was autistic and subsequently got diagnosed at the age of 50, I noticed that this gullibility is the default setting for non-autistic persons, a result of their natural urge to fit in. The individual nature of autistic people stands in stark contrast to the social nature of non-autistic people. In a group setting or in the presence of an authority figure, the behavior of non-autistic people differs from their usual behavior. The behavior of autistic people does not. In some cases, the autistic individual may not even be aware of the existence of a group. If the group majority or a person in authority perceive things a certain way, non-autistic members have a strong tendency to agree with them regardless of the reality. On autistic group members, however, their suggestions have no effect, just like they are less likely to fall for illusions or cognitive biases such as the bandwagon or the framing effect. In a group setting, just as in any other situation, autistic persons tend to take statements and people at face value and remain oblivious to any hidden agendas and underlying conflicts. For a while, I served on the board of a primary school. I was task-orientated and, according to the others, did an excellent job. However, I was entirely unaware of a power struggle that was going on around me until the situation exploded. Even as members of a group, the personality of autistic people remains unchanged. This is the reason why we tend to be immune to peer pressure, groupthink, which is the avoidance of conflict, group shift, which is taking a more extreme position than we would outside the group, and bias towards them, the outsiders. We also see no point in reputation maintenance and rather focus, where applicable, on the task at hand. And because we never hide behind a group identity or an authority, I believe that autistic individuals are far more likely to accept responsibility for their own actions. While non-autistic persons tend to work more efficiently in groups, autistic persons are more efficient working on their own. We have very concrete ideas and therefore loathe compromises. For example, the Sistine Chapel ceiling was painted by Michelangelo. Can you imagine him as a part of a team with limited input and having to negotiate every character and cloud he painted? Human rights movements usually begin as protests organized by a group, but some are sparked off by the actions of individuals. Autistic people, because of our individual nature and because we tend not to be listened to, are more likely to choose this course of action. One example is Greta Thunberg, the climate activist who started a mass movement with a solitary protest outside the Swedish parliament. She said, "People also say that since I have Asperger, I couldn't possibly have put myself in this position. But that's exactly why I did this. Because if I would have been normal and social, I would have organized myself in an organization or started an organization by myself. But since I am not that good at socializing, I did this instead." On the downside, the fact that we are one of the last unheard minorities may be due to our preference for individual work, which makes it difficult to organize a mass movement. Thunberg was successful because her agenda hit a nerve with the masses. Our cause doesn't. The human inclination for conformity and compliance with authorities has long been underestimated. Inspired by the trial of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann, who claimed to have just followed orders, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted the Milgram experiment, in which subjects were asked to run a test with a volunteer in an adjacent room to deliver an electric shock of increasing voltage for every wrong answer. From a certain point, the volunteer screamed and later begged the subjects to stop. Some subjects voiced concerns, but the experimenter told them that the experiment had to be concluded. Milgram had polled his colleagues beforehand, and the highest estimate was that 3% of all subjects would continue to the potentially fatal 450-volt shock. 65% did. The experiment has since been repeated frequently with consistent results. The subjects justified their behavior by claiming that they had just followed orders. Autistic people don't just follow orders. We are skeptical, if not resentful, of authority figures and generally disobey any order that goes against our conscience or doesn't make sense to us. It certainly would be interesting to see the experiment repeated with autistic subjects. I dare say that not a single one will go all the way. Non-autistic people usually follow the set of worldviews of a political camp to which they conform in their entirety, and from which they hardly derive. You could call it an opinion package, while autistic persons form their own opinions on individual issues. Unfortunately, there are no studies, but you will find that many autistic people hold views others may consider incompatible. Being different ourselves, autistic people also tend to be more accepting of diversity. Another reason for us being on average more tolerant than others again lies in the social nature of non-autistic people, who often identify with a group rather than as individuals. These groups, such as nationality, race or religion, tend to foster an us versus them mentality, which views outsiders and other groups with suspicion and animosity. In many cases, the group identity is used to instill an irrational fear and hatred of other groups who, in fact, don't pose any threat. Because of an individual nature, autistic people are less likely to judge people by their group affiliation. Our perceived stubbornness, inflexibility, and wariness of authority figures, combined with our increased sense of fairness and justice, provide the ideal material for human rights activists who permanently strive to change the world for the better. Besides Greta Thunberg, there are Mahatma Gandhi, whose autobiography clearly demonstrates that he was autistic, and Nelson Mandela, who is also suspected of having been autistic. The likely connection of autism to Neanderthal DNA has been suggested as early as 2001. While Homo sapiens had made no significant progress in over 100,000 years, the Neanderthals painted their caves, played musical instruments, developed advanced tools and complicated manufacturing and hunting techniques, and buried their dead. Only after Homo sapiens had assimilated the Neanderthal, the great leap forward occurred, which eventually gave rise to modern humans. There are voices calling for our elimination. So what would the world look without us? As Professor Temple Grandin said, you would have a bunch of people standing around in a cave, chatting and socializing and not getting anything done. In order to validate or invalidate the claims I make, it would be interesting to see the following studies and experiments conducted. Firstly, the Milgram experiment carried out on persons with an autism diagnosis. It should also be recorded whether they were subject to ABA in the past. If, against my prognosis, any autistic person would be ready to send 450 volts through somebody else, they are most likely to have experienced conditioning in childhood. Secondly, a case-controlled study on the combination of political views regarding their deviation from the combination of mainstream positions. And thirdly, a case-controlled study on the willingness of subjects to accept responsibility for their own actions within a group setting. Thank you for listening. Once more, you can read all my articles at autismappreciation.com. See you.